Hello, and welcome to Factorio. I'm Dorthek. This is part one of a train tutorial series. This will be a short series, not a complete playthrough, and the goal here will be to demonstrate how to use trains and what's involved in them. We're going to start with the absolute basics and then hopefully go into fairly significant detail. So this may be of benefit to both new players and players with a little bit of experience, but we're going to start with the very fundamental stuff. It should be noted that this video started under Factorio 0.17.74 and was updated to 0.17.75 during recording. The only major changes for between 0.74, which is an experimental version, and the stable version of 0.17 is that some of the tooltips changed. They are now providing more and better organized information. Everything in this tutorial should work perfectly fine in the stable version. There should be absolutely no differences, but the tooltips may look different. So whether you choose playing the stable or the experimental version, this tutorial should be appropriate. Now, if you came here from my tutorial series, we're not playing on the tutorial map. This is a different map that was created with no enemies, no biters, no resources, but with a mod called Infinity Mode, which puts us into editor mode and gives us access to infinity chests and infinity-like items that will help us do the demo much more quickly than otherwise would happen. So, you don't need to worry about what this stuff does. We're going to focus on regular, plain Factorio vanilla trains. So to start with trains, you gotta have some train tracks. Now, when you first put one down, you can turn it which way you want, and there's a piece of train. Now, you can build trains just like you build belts, one at a time, but that's not the best way to do it. Much better is if you hold the train in your hand and place the mouse over an existing train, you will get these arrows. If you go to the end and grab an arrow leading out, it will let you place a straight or curved track as you wish. Now, as you can see here, this is about as far as you can go. I can't move this any further. I can go in shorter, but not further. If I hold the shift button, then I go into a ghost placement mode, which allows me to go out much further and also allows me to do all kinds of weird shapes. Now, one of the useful tricks here is if while you're planning your ghost cursor, you press the R button while still holding the shift, you can rotate which way you want the output segment to go. So by default, this position would have the output segment pointing down, but I can press R and have it turned this way. Now, in this case, it got placed because with the Infinity mod and the editor mode, I have effectively instantly fast, instantly capable robots. If you were doing this in a regular game, you would get a ghost and then have to either have robots place it or place it yourself. Now, you can do this to do all sorts of shapes and sizes, whatever you'd like, and by pressing the R button, you can really control how they look. So, I've just completed a loop. Great. What do we do with it? Well, we gotta build a train. A train is comprised of, I'm getting achievements because this game has been reset. A train starts with a locomotive. You gotta have one of those, and you gotta have something for it to feed, which I did not prep, but that's okay. You could use coal, you could use wood, you could use solid fuel, you can use rocket fuel, and you can use nuclear fuel. If you mouse over it, you can see that there's an improvement to vehicle acceleration and top speed. So coal, it gives you base, solid fuel, rocket fuel, and nuclear fuel is the ultimate. Let's start with coal. We can just place some in here, and now we have a train. Well, the first thing we can do is drive the train manually. If you walk over to the train and press the Enter key, you will get into the train. The forward button will cause the train to accelerate. That would be the W. The S button will cause the train to decelerate if you're moving forward, and it will cause it to go backwards once you're stopped. Now, in manual mode, the train can go forwards or it can go backwards. This is nice. This is a very quick way to get from places to place, but it's not terribly useful. So at the very minimum, we want to add a car. Now the car can hold stuff. It has 40 slots for whatever you want to put in it. And you can have pretty much as many cars as you want. Different people prefer different designs of how many cars to use. I'm just going to use this one here for the time being. So now I can go someplace and bring the car along. Note that the more cars you have, the slower you will go. So, now we've learned how to drive the train manually. That's the very base of the Factorio train, but it doesn't really get us a whole lot. If we look in the technology tree, there are 3 railroad technologies. The first one, railway, gets you the rails, the locomotives, and the cargo wagon. By itself, this is not terribly useful, which is why most people immediately get the next 2. The second one, automated rail transportation, gets you train stops, and the third one gets you rail signals. You need all 3 in order to accomplish much with railroads. There is one other technology that is very useful, and that's fluid handling, which gets you pumps, followed by fluid wagon, which gets you fluid wagons that allow you to transport liquids. Generally speaking, you're going to want these at the same time. In fact, in most of my games, my first use of trains is to transport oil and oil products, not cargo. So to those purposes, you can get a fluid wagon, which stores 25,000 fluid. By the way, you can pick up wagons and locomotives with the right mouse button, just like everything else. So, assuming you have all 3 technologies researched, what can we do with this? Well, first we can give it some fuel. We can build some train stops. Train stops always go on the on one or the other side of the track, and you pretty much have to put them on straight pieces of track. You can see if I try to place it here, it just won't work. It has to go on one of these green dots. You'll also notice that this shows you the position of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 train items. That could be a locomotive or it could be a wagon. That's not the default. This is controlled in settings interface under train visualization length. I believe the default is 5. Since I tend to use trains that are 6 long, I always set this to 6. Set it as appropriate for the trains you're going to be using. So, what does a train stop do for us? Well, let's put one over here. And let's drive our train over to this side. And let's name this train. If you click on it, you can change its color to whatever color you'd like it to be using the RGB controls. And you can name it. So we're going to just call this one Train Stop 1. Very creative. Make sure you hit enter or click the little enter button, otherwise the change will not happen. If you click on the train, first off, you can also, by clicking on this eyedropper, change its color if you so choose. Some people color code their trains depending on what's being carried. Something like this maybe for trains carrying iron ore. Most do not. Over here you can load fuel into it. There's up to 3 slots of fuel, and we discussed that just a bit ago. Over here, however, is the automation. So we can add a station. We can add train stop 1. We're not going to worry about the weight condition quite yet. And as you can see, we have manual and automatic mode. Manual mode is what we saw before, means I can manually drive this train. Automatic mode, however, if we flip this to automatic, the train will automatically go to the stop. Now, since there are no other stops, there's nothing else for the train to do. Let's put it back on manual, and let's edit this a little bit so that we can get a more useful route. So now we have space for a second train stop. Let's creatively name this train stop Train Stop 2. Okay, so now we can add a second station, Train Stop 2. If we put this on automatic now, let's watch what happens. You'll notice that it's not stopping because it doesn't have any wait conditions. It gets to the station and immediately proceeds to the next one. We can try to catch the train and click on it and put it into manual mode, but it's hard right here. So if we go to this button here for trains, we can click on the individual train. Let's put you back on manual, and it'll coast to a stop. Let's add some wait conditions. So there's a whole bunch of different ones. Time passed is just wait for, in this case, 30 seconds. You can freely adjust that. And that's an okay condition if you're just wanting it to go somewhere and pause. We can do this. We can also click here and type in 5 seconds. And if we do it this way and set it back to automatic, we'll get a better picture of what is going on. Train gets there, pauses, waits our 5 seconds, and then resumes. Alright, well that's not very interesting. We can remove the condition by clicking X. We can remove a train spot entirely by clicking X. We can also rearrange train stops if we need to by dragging them here in this kind of zone. So, inactivity means that nothing is happening to the train. If we set it right now, we are simply going to get infinite looping again. More useful is full cargo and empty cargo. These are among the most common conditions. These allow us to send the train to some place to pick up cargo. It'll wait until the cargo is completely full, then it'll go somewhere to empty the cargo and wait until it's empty. Or you can go for specific counts. Maybe you don't want a full cargo, maybe you want half a cargo. Same thing with fluids. You can also do it based on whether a passenger is present. So this is very useful for if you want a train that's really there to transport you. So let's set it to automatic. It'll get to the station, and then it'll wait until we get in the train. As soon as we get in the train, it will go. If I now jump out of the train, it'll wait at the next station. The problem is, if I don't jump out, let's see what happens. It's just going to keep going. Now, if I'm quick, I can try to jump out, but if I'm not quick enough in that particular moment, the train will just keep going. I honestly don't use these much at all. If I'm using a train that is meant to transport me, what I do is I add circuit condition. And circuit condition is there for wiring into a circuit control network. And I'm not actually going to bother with a train control network. It's because it's never getting a signal, it will just never move. So if I send it to train spot 1, it'll just sit there, whether I'm inside or not, until I jump in, click on it, and tell it, okay, now please go to train stop 2. Notice that instead of setting it to, it's set to automatic, but I'm manually telling it which station to go to. That's not really of much interest when you only have 2 stations, but if we were to have 3 stations, let's name this one creatively train spot 3 and click the apply button. We can add train stop 3, add the circuit condition to it as well, and let's see, I'm currently at stop 2. The next stop would be 3, but maybe I don't want to go to 3. Maybe I want to go directly to 1. I can click that, and it will take me to 1. Okay, so we have figured out stations a little bit. Now, here's a very important thing to note. If I was driving this train manually, I could go forward, I could go in reverse. Which means, if there was no track going forward and I just wanted to get to station 2, I could just reverse and get there. That only works with this train setup on manual. If I try to tell it to go to station train stop 2, look what happens. we're getting no path signals, and the train stop became red. Why is that? Well, the reason for that is locomotives on automatic can only go forward. They can never go backward. So we either need to give it a forward path, or if we really want a train that can go in both directions, we can get a second locomotive, turn it around with R, and attach it in the back. Let's give it some fuel. That doesn't matter. We can give it solid fuel. Note that because they're in the same train, it has the same schedule. So, I have rebuilt our train system to demonstrate something useful. If I wanted to go from train station 1 here to train station 2 manually, with the train in manual mode, I could back it up. I can go this way. I can go this way. Life is good. But if I try to drive the train in automatic mode and tell it, hey, train, go to train stop 2, look what happens. I get little no path messages, and this stop is highlighted in red. What's going on? Well, what's going on is that while it's perfectly fine to drive a train in reverse on manual, on automatic, a train can only go the way the locomotive is facing. So how do we fix that? Well, either we give it a forward path, or we take another locomotive, turn it facing the other way, and put it on the other side of the train. Let's give it some fuel. Now, because it's the same train, if we click on this locomotive, it has the same schedule. And if we now hop in and tell it go to train stop 2, it's perfectly happy. It can go to train stop 2, it can go to train stop 1 again, in either direction. It really doesn't matter, it'll pick whichever route it likes best. Now, and I need to give it some more fuel. Let's put some fuel into this one. Now, the question you should be asking is, well, why did he build this other loop? Couldn't we just go this way? And the answer is we can't, because there's one more factor to consider here. If I delete that loop and tell it to go to train stop 2, we're back to no path errors. Now, we can drive there manually, and once I'm here, it'll be perfectly happy to go to train stops 2. What is going on? Well, what's going on is that train stations always have to be on the right side of the train from the train's point of view. Right now the train is, if the train is going this way, in the direction of the blue locomotive, this station is on the right. It'll happily go to train stop 3 or train stop 1 because the train station is on the right. But if we tell it to go to train stop 2, we're now heading in the direction of the red locomotive. And from the point of view of the red locomotive, that station is on the left, and therefore it is not a valid station. How do we fix it? Well, we could put some stations on one side and some on the other. You'll notice that when we mouse over them, the visualization of the train and the direction of the train is opposite. But if we really want a stop that it can be approached from either side, we simply put them in the same place but on opposite sides. We should also name them the same, which we can do either by editing this and selecting train stop 2, or like with many things we can do shift right click, shift left click, there, now it's train stop 2. Now, if we get in, it is perfectly happy to go to train stop 2. Note that it's stopping on this side of the station because it's really going to this stop. This is what people call a two-headed train or a two-directional train, and the truth is, these are not particularly useful. And the reason they're not particularly useful is because you cannot plan particularly efficient networks with them. They have advantages, and we'll discuss them in a bit. However, the next thing we need to talk about is signals. Let's switch to a different train setup that I built to demonstrate train set. So, I've built this little test track to demonstrate what we use signals for. I have two trains, and obviously this is just a closed loop to demonstrate the problem. I've built this signal, and the two trains have exactly the same schedule. They go to stop X, and then they go to stop Y. You can copy and paste schedules between trains by doing shift right click, shift left. Well, suppose this train is offloading or onloading. It's sitting here and waiting. But this train is coming in. What happens? Nothing good. They just run into each other. This train got damaged, and that's not the result we want. If the train was going faster, it would do even more damage. By the way, don't stand on the tracks when there's active trains around, because the trains will kill you if they're going fast enough. Unless you're wearing really, really good power armor, and even then, they might still kill you. So, most of us, myself very much included, die from being hit by trains far more often than we ever do from biters. So, how do we prevent this? Well, that's why we have signals. The first signal we're going to talk about is right here. It looks like a little traffic light. It's called the rail signal, or the regular signal is what it's frequently called. The other one is officially called the rail chain signal. Most of us just call it chain. So regular or rail signals and chain signal. So if we pick one up in our hand, we will notice that there's a yellow line running through all these rails. Well, what that yellow line means is that all of these rails are one block. Let's back off this train a bit. We also get those green squares that show us where we can place them, much like with stations. And they also show us, as we place them, where the train behind them, and if you're near the station ahead of them, might end up. Now we're using short trains right here, so I'm going to place one here, and I'm going to place one here. And look what happens. You can only see it if you're holding a signal in your hand. This half of the track is now yellow, and this half of the track is now red. What does the train signal do? Well, the train signal says, if there's a train in the block ahead of me, then display red and don't let trains into it. If there's not, then display green. Don't worry about yellow right now. So if we set this one back to automatic, it'll come over here and stop. Now, the problem is we only have two blocks. So this train is in the red block, and this train is in the yellow block, which means if we tell this one to go to automatic mode, it's going to stop there, and now we have a deadlock, because this train will never get to this station, and this train will never get to this station, so they will never clear their blocks. The solution is to create more blocks. Generally speaking, we want a signal at the entrance, or some sort of signal, we'll just use the rail for now, and at the exit of the station, because now everything is working, because these are no longer the same blocks. Now we don't have to have one over here, but we should. The exit here. So now we have divided our system into 4 blocks, 2 little yellow ones for the stations and 2 red ones for the train travel. The trains will never collide. This is not the most efficient way to do it because our blocks are awfully long. Generally, when you have a long straightaway, you want the blocks to be no longer than your longest train. And the reason for that should be fairly obvious. Let's drive this train here while holding a block. Because if we are stopped, let's say we have a train stopped over here for whatever reason. Maybe it ran out of fuel. Maybe there's some other traffic going on. Because we have so few blocks, this train can't leave the station. Which means if we have a third train with the same schedule, I'm gonna give it some nuclear fuel because I have it. This train can't get to the station and offload, reload, whatever it needs to do because it's being blocked by that train. Well, that train can get out of the station. So if we place some more chain blocks about a train length apart, right, we always want it to be about a train length apart, we can fix this problem, right? This train doesn't need to wait back there. It can wait up here. Trains can get in. Now, since we don't have any branches, we can't get out of here, but we can at least make it a little bit more efficient for our trains. Now, these are tiny little blocks because we're using little two-length trains. In practice, you would need much longer blocks. So now, no matter where this train is stuck, it's only blocking one block at a time. And we can see that happening here. Okay, well, that's all well and good. But this is a artificially simplified situation. What happens in a more complicated situation? Here we have this train running north-south along this track. And let's change their colors. That's the red train, and this can be the blue train. Okay, and the blue train is running east-west along this loop. Now, they're in different loops, but they cross. If we let them both go, sooner or later, they will have a collision. I mean, I suppose it's possible to perfectly time things, but I would not count on perfect timing because you can, when you're loading and offloading, there could be delays, and it's just not a good idea. So clearly the solution is signals. Let's repair these cars because having them being broken is, I find distracting. This one also needs fixing. Now, we could use our friendly chain signals, right? We know we want to put one after a train station and one before a train station. I already placed that there. Again, one after, one before. And now we want to do something to keep them from hitting each other. I didn't put any on... oh, that's the wrong side. So the problem, of course, is that there's nothing to stop them from being in the middle. Well, what we can do is we can use some more train signals to subdivide this block. We can put a signal here, a signal here, a signal here, a signal here, 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 one here. Okay, so now we can see that this yellow section is its own block, and our signals will never let two trains be in the same block. Sounds good, right? Let's turn the trains on and see how they behave. Oh, that one's waiting for this one to clear. It goes through. That one paused to wait for this to clear. Looks pretty good, right? And it would be, except for one thing. And that thing is the possibility of deadlocks. Okay, here's the problem. Suppose this train is... Let's back it up a bit. This train is coming north, and it has a green signal, and it comes up right to here, and it stops for some reason. It's not... Maybe it ran out of fuel, maybe something else is going on. Now, this whole block is occupied. This train can't get in. Well, okay, what if we subdivide it further? What if we put some blocks here in between. That'll work, right? Now, the northern trains can pass, but the southern cannot. And while that prevents that particular problem, it does not solve the overall deadlock issue, because here's what could happen. Let's make this one the green train, and we will give it the same schedule as the red train. Oh, copying also copies the color. And let's get one more train and give it the same schedule as the blue train, but let's give it a different color. Let's make it kind of magenta. Needs fuel. So look what happens now. If I set all of these trains to automatic, there's a deadlock. They can't go anywhere because each one is blocked by the next train. This may seem artificial, but in practice this happens way more often than you would think. So what's the underlying problem? The underlying problem is that each of these trains entered a block, but was not able to leave the block. And that's the key problem. We want to make sure that when you... Now, with a block like this, that's okay, right? It just needs to get into the next block. With the blocks we discussed before, the ones that are just there so that trains don't occupy the whole segment, the train entered, and it's fine if it stays there because the next train can't go anywhere anyway. But here, we really don't want this train entering here if it's unable to leave. If we had somehow made this train stay back here, well, then the deadlock wouldn't have occurred. So how do we do that? Well, we do that with chain signals. Let's put all of these trains on manual. So that they are not in our way. Let's move them back to where we would like them to be. Okay, so this is where our friend the chain signal comes in. The difference between the chain signal and the rail signal is the rail signal looks at the next block and either goes red or green. So this signal looks at the blue block and it'll either let a train in or it won't. So right now it'll let a train in even though it might be unable to exit. A chain signal, however, does more than that. It still works like a rail signal. So if there's anything in this blue cyan block here, it'll go red. But it also looks at the next signal, at the next block. And if anything is occupying that one, it will not it will go red as well. Now, that means that if the yellow is occupied, let's occupy yellow, right? That makes this signal go red, and that makes this chain signal also go red. So this train won't enter the intersection. That's not quite good enough, though, because if this train was here, and let's back this one up a bit, this signal says, well, cyan is clear, so we can go forward on that basis. And the next signal, the one that looks at yellow, is also clear, so we can enter, right? Well, no, because while we can clear the cyan block, we can't clear the whole intersection. So the solution is to replace this one with a chain signal as well. And now you can see it is red. So if we do that like so, and we need to make sure we have these blocks broken up some. Okay, so now if we take a look at it, we can see that this red signal checks this regular signal here checks this red block. It's occupied, therefore this whole chain of signals won't let this train come in. So if we set this one to automatic, it will wait here. If we set both of these to automatic, they can freely travel, and this train will not enter the intersection until it can get out of the intersection. So if we now manually drive the green train out of the way, where does the intersection end? Well, we can put another block here. Right? Now this one can clear the intersection, and so it's allowed to proceed. We can now set all of our trains to automatic, and they will run and behave politely and not create deadlock. And then this brings us to a very important rule of train signals in Factorio. Let's stop these guys so they're just not mindlessly running around. And that rule is this: anytime you have an intersection, with an intersection being two or more tracks interacting with each other, crossing each other, you want a chain signal before the crossing of the rails, and you want a regular signal after the entire intersection. So the way we would figure out how to do this from scratch, let's remove all the signals, is we have to think about it from the point of view of each possible train and say, when are we entering the intersection and when are we leaving it? Well, if we're coming up this track, we're entering the intersection here. So before entering an intersection, we put a chain signal. We're exiting it here, so we put a regular signal. From the point of view of this train, we're entering it here, so we need a chain signal. We're exiting it here, so we need a regular signal. Now let's look at the horizontal trains. We're entering it here, and we're exiting it here. From the point of view of this, we're exiting here and entering here. Now you'll notice I did not place the signals in the middle. That's actually okay, because this will work exactly as intended, right? Because this signal won't allow a train into the blue intersection block until the yellow exit block is clear. We can demonstrate this by turning our trains back on. And watching them not collide with each other and wait their turns. Now, this is slightly less efficient because of this kind of situation. Let's take this train to manual and drive it to the position I would like it to be. Suppose this train is here, and it stopped here for some reason. Now, I did it at a bad moment. Hold on. Let's drive this one manually to the position I wanted for the demonstration. by the way, if you have automatic trains running, be very careful also driving manual trains around. So take a look. This train here broke down, right? Maybe it ran out of fuel, and in fact it's got no fuel. Now clearly it's blocking the lower rail, and the purple train should not be able to enter it. But there's no reason for the blue train not to go, except that this whole intersection is one large block. So, if we subdivide it by placing a chain signal right here and another one right here, we've now cut that block in half, and that train can go on its merry way. In general, the chain signal should go as close to the intersection as possible because you want to stop the train just short of hitting the next one. You also want the exit to be as close as possible because you want the train to clear as quickly as you can and free up the... that was my mistake. Because you want the trains to clear the intersections. Okay, so the rule of thumb is, again, a chain signal at the entrance of an intersection, and ideally before each crossing, and a regular signal at the exit of each intersection. All right, great. We understand how these crossings work. A few more things we need to look at. Okay, so on this section here, we've built something new. We have a split and we have a merge. And it is useful to see how that's built. And that's built if we have a lane like this. We saw before that if we grab this triangle at the end, we can keep going, but we can also grab a triangle in the middle and split it off. Similarly, if we have some track going this way, we can bring it in and try to get it lined up. Positioning can be a little bit tricky because rails have certain minimum radius. You cannot make a 90-degree turn any tighter than that. It's impossible. You also notice that trains are less fine-grained than other things. I can place belts in every one location, but train tracks can be placed here or here. I cannot place a train track in the middle between here, right? So train tracks have a granularity kind of twice what the belts do. That impacts how you can butt them up against each other. One of the places that comes up very frequently is if you have a slight misalignment. Let's say you have this track coming in here, and then you have another track coming in here. If you want to merge them, you're going to have a hard time because between minimum radiuses and spacing, you're just not going to be able to do it. If you use your train planner with shift and give it enough space, you'll see that what you actually have to do... Well, I don't like that one at all. Let's see. Is something like that, where you actually have to go away and then back to make the radius large enough to work. But that's kind of more advanced rail laying theory. We don't really need that. So let's come back to this. We have merges and we have merge together and split apart. Now, let's start by driving this train manually. How do I decide which way to go? Well, you just use your A and D key. If I hold A, I will go to the left branch. If I hold D, I will go to the right branch. Merges obviously just happen. The question then is, how do we signal the merges? Well, we have to think in terms of how do we keep trains from interfering with each other. So let's set up a second train. And we're going to give them slightly different schedules. Fuel. Let's say this, I've named these stations P, Q, and R. And let's say this train runs between P and R, and we're going to eliminate the wait conditions. And this train runs between P and Q. And again, let's eliminate the wait conditions. So let's see where we have problems. Go. Go. And let's take a look at our signaling. Let's give them different colors, though. That can be our yellow train. So, the red train goes to P and R. The yellow train goes to P and Q. Let's get them going and see where we have problems or where we don't have problems. Well, so far so good. And if we look at the way the blocks are set up, we can see why we're not having problems, because this entire split fork and this entire entry fork are one block, and so neither train will enter it if the other one is sitting there. Well, that's good in that it won't cause crashes. It's not so good because it can cause deadlocks. Well, what do we mean by deadlocks? Let's stop our trains and place them where we need them to go. Suppose this train broke down right here. Now we want this train to go, and it'll go to the station, and now it's stuck because it cannot enter this large block. Well, one way to look at what's going on here is to say these signals are too far away. If I were to put another signal here and one here, that will resolve the deadlock. And that is definitely one of the ways to do it. Now, this is an intersection. Our normal rule for an intersection is that we enter it with a chain signal and we exit it with a regular signal. So first off, let's put a regular signal at the exit, just to make these blocks smaller. If we followed our rule, we would need to put a chain signal at the entrance here and a chain signal at the entrance there, and that will work. Let's put them back on automatic. We're still not gonna get any collisions. But with merges, with a simple merge like this, we actually don't have to use chain signals if we don't want to. They will work perfectly adequately if we make these chain signals, because there's no situation in which a train that is blocking the intersection because it can't exit is any worse than a train that's blocking the intersection for any other reason, right? If we had this here, if we had this train here, let's build a third train. So suppose there's a train stopped here, maybe because this signal here is red. Doesn't matter. Or, this chain signal, this regular signal says you can't enter this block. These, however, will allow trains to enter this merge block. So what? If this train is stopped here, we don't want this train entering. It's blocked, but it's not falsely blocked. If we had chain signals, well, then this train would never enter it, but that doesn't matter because this train still can't go anywhere. Now, I'll be honest, I prefer to use this arrangement, chain signals going in, rail signals going out, because I just kind of have that rule of thumb in my head. Always do chain signals at the entrance, rail signals at the end. But technically, you could use all rail signals here. So that's the merge. So let's take a look at the split here. Well, if we follow a regular rule, we will place a change signal at the entrance to this intersection, and we will place a regular signal at the exit of the intersection. And that will actually work perfectly fine. The rule holds, but there is an interesting behavior here that you need to be aware of. So we know that the rule is for change signals is that the change signal looks at the next block to determine whether it can go or not. But here we have two. So which one do we look at? Well, right now, both this red block and this red block are clear, so it's green. Well, that makes sense. And now, both of these are red, so it's red. That also makes sense. But what if it's one or the other? This station wants to go to stop Q. This one here. This is only blocking the upper branch. So what happens when one branch is blocked and the other isn't? This side is red, this side is green. This side here is blue. Well, what does blue mean? Blue means that just what we saw, that some exits are green and some are red. Now our train knows which way it wants to go. This train wants to go to station Q over here. So if we put it on automatic, it will go through, it'll treat that blue as a green. This one, however, wants to go to station R. So if we send it here, it will stop, because it knows it cannot go down the branch it wants. So while the signal is blue, the train itself is smart enough to figure out, well, okay, which of those do I care about? That's very, very powerful behavior. Train pathing is a complex topic. How trains plan their paths well in advance, and there are certain techniques for forcing them to recalculate their path. And we will talk about that a little bit later when we talk about the networks of trains. Now, I do want to cover one final topic here. So, one thing I've been doing without discussing it is the placement of signal. Here we have a section of straight track, and we've invariably done things like this. Here's one signal, here's another signal, here's another signal, and it all works very well. This is station M. If I tell the train to go, it will cheerfully get to station M. Great. Let's back this train up to the end of the track. By the way, if you run full speed into the end of a track on manual, nothing bad happens. It just doesn't go. Why could we not put them on this side of the track? Well, let's take a look at what happens. I'm getting a no path error. There's a path right there. I can drive right down the track. The hidden bit here that I have not discussed before is that just as the station has to be on the right side, as we saw earlier, the station has to be on the right side from the point of view of a train, so do the signals. Any signal on the left side of the track will form a complete block. Having these signals here tells the train that this is a one-way track going that way, from right to left, so this train may not go on it. Now, what if we wanted to have a two-headed train? Let's put this on manual. We have one of those two-headed trains. Right? Now we want this train to go to station M. It can't. Why not? Because in order for a track to be two-way, each signal has to have the same signal on the other side. This tells the train that this is a two-way track and it's allowed to go in either direction. So if we now add station N to it, it will cheerfully bounce back and forth. Each station is on the right side from the point of view of direction of travel, and all of the signals are, at any given point, the signals are on the right side from the direction of travel. The moment I take one of those away, it's no longer happy in that direction. Now, of course, now we have a length 3 train, so we need to space our signals a little bit further apart for it to work correctly. We can place one set of signals here, but we cannot fit a second set of signals. And that may be okay. So, we have covered a great deal in this episode. It's going to be quite long. We've discussed how to lay track. We've discussed how to place stations. We've discussed one-directional and two-directional trains. And we discussed how to handle signals along a straight, signals along at an intersection like this, and signals at merges and splits. Again, the main takeaways for signals are, if you have a long straightaway, then just use regular signals to break up the straightaway into blocks, with each block being at least as long as your longest train that you're using on that network. And when you're dealing with intersections, chain signal when you enter it, regular signals when you exit it. Chain signal when you enter it, chain signal before each subsequent intersection, each subsequent crossing of tracks, regular signal at the exit from the intersection. And the one exception to this is that if you have a merge with what we call an exit merge, right? This is a merge and there's no more intersection past that. It's not in the middle of of a more complex intersection. If we also had, this going on here, this would not be an exit merge because the intersection is not done. But if it's an exit merge, then you don't have to use two chain and a regular. You're allowed to use regulars everywhere if you choose to. It doesn't actually matter. Next time, we will discuss train networks, how to put this together into making a useful way to move trains from point to point. And we will also, it's either in the next section or the one after that, discuss how to build stations that are useful for loading and unloading goods. As with my other series, in the description, you'll get a link to a Google Doc that has links to other resources, including one of my absolutely favorite train guides. It's one that's written by a Reddit user, Grays42. The guide is 3 years old and it is still absolutely spot on. I highly recommend it. It's how I learned to do trains in the first place. But in the meanwhile, you have more than enough knowledge to try to put together a basic train system yourself. So why don't you go ahead and try one of these yourself? And as always, don't forget to save.